right, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Like I said, welcome to Serving Survivors of Intimate Partner Sexual Violence. I'm Victoria Riekers. I am one of the sexual violence response coordinators at IPSV, and I'm joined with Sam Hinchy today. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Samantha, or Sam, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am one of the domestic violence response coordinators here at the coalition, and I'm happy to be here with all of you.
We're super excited to be co-presenting this to you all today. Before we really get started, I want to go over some basic housekeeping. So I know many of you are probably familiar with Zoom now because we've been using it quite a bit during COVID, and I'm sure your programs have been as well. But I just want to go over that there's a chat function. So if you want to put in the chat right now, what is the weather like where you are calling in from today? That way we can know that y'all hear us and that you know how to access the chat function, because we're going to be using it to do some different activities today. I'm seeing hot and humid. Very hot. Yeah, super hot. I feel like I should have come up with a different question to ask because it's hot everywhere right now. Oh, it's been storming for someone. I'm super jealous. Breezy and perfect. Very jealous.
I love the person that put toaster-like. I support that description of the toaster.
Wow. Someone's calling in from New Orleans today. That's awesome.
Now I want a beignet.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for putting all your weather stuff in there. It's great. It looks like the chat is working really well, and that you know where to find it. And then the second thing is there's also a Q&A function. And so the Q&A function is really where we want you all to put your questions, because sometimes the chat can be really hard for us as presenters to see what your questions are, so we might miss it. But if you put it in the Q&A, we get a notification, and then we're able to answer the question. We'll also pause, I think, at different times for questions, just to make sure that we're not missing any of your questions, because we want this to be as helpful for you all as possible. I also want to say, I don't think this will be a problem today, but we know that Zoom bombing has been a problem as we've all switched to virtual. So Zoom bombing won't be tolerated in the chat. So if someone tries to go rogue in the chat, we've got Lachey moderating the chat and looking out for us. So please make sure that everyone's being respectful in the chat, and we shouldn't have a problem. And like I said, I really don't expect there to be a problem, but I just wanted to put that out there. And then finally, at the end of today's presentation, we will be having an evaluation of the training. So please don't log off right away at the end of the presentation. Please make sure to complete the evaluation, because we really need that information, both so we can improve our trainings and also for our grant reporting purposes, so that we can continue to provide trainings like this for you all. So without any further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So today's topic is intimate partner sexual violence. And so before we really get into intimate partner sexual violence and all the best practices for that, we want to make sure everyone's on the same page about sexual violence and intimate partner violence as their own concepts. And then we'll be talking about them together. So what is sexual violence, right? What is sexual violence? Now, I'm sure many of you who have attended our sexual violence trainings before have seen this slide, but just a quick review. We define sexual violence as any type of unwanted sexual contact, so or sexual activity or experience, right? So basically, the key is that there's no consent involved in that sexual experience. So this can look like a range of experiences. So it could be rape, and rape we define as penetration of someone's body without consent. And so this could be vaginal penetration, anal penetration, oral penetration, all of that. So penetrations of someone's body either someone else's body or with an object. Another form could be stalking. So stalking, we'll talk about later, has quite a bit of overlap sometimes with intimate partner violence, but stalking can have a sexualized component to it. So that's why we like to include it under our umbrella for sexual violence. Sexual exploitation. I think we most often see that as sex trafficking. But it could also be like blackmailing someone, right? Like if they sent nude photos and blackmailing them to do certain things because you have their nude photos. Non-contact unwanted sexual experiences, right? So sexual violence does not need to involve physical contact to be considered sexual violence. It could be things like street harassment. It could be forcing someone to watch pornography without their consent. It could be someone being masturbated at, but there's no physical contact. It could be revenge porn, right? So that's when someone takes someone's nude or maybe not quite nude photos and posts them right on the internet or shares them. That's revenge porn. And that doesn't involve physical contact necessarily. Sexual harassment is a form of sexual violence, and sexual harassment is similar in that it can have a very broad scope, right? It could be unwanted sexual advances, right? Repeatedly asking someone out when they say no, and it could also be rape as a form of sexual harassment, right? And this, we typically think about happening in the workplace. It could also be happening right on the street, like I mentioned before, like street harassment. Made to penetrate. So made to penetrate is when someone is forced to penetrate someone else, right? So maybe they're forced to penetrate someone with their own body, or they're forced to penetrate someone with an object, right? And so we have this distinction between rape as being penetrated and then someone who's forced to penetrate someone else. We mostly have this because the statistics that we have are defined that way. And we just want to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible with our definition of sexual violence. Unwanted sexual contact is any form of physical contact that's sexual and is unwanted. So this could be sexually kissing someone or sexually touching someone without consent. And then sexual coercion. So sexual coercion is more of a tactic of sexual violence than its own sort of unique form of sexual violence. And it's one of the most common tactics used. And so this is pressuring someone into sexual contact of any kind. So this could be pushing past someone's no and like kind of like trying to seduce them is what it can look like in romantic comedies when it's actually sexual coercion. It could be saying that you're going to break up with someone if they don't agree to have sex with you. So that emotional manipulation, saying that they don't love you if they won't have sex with you, all of that can be considered sexual coercion. And so the reason we use this really expanded definition with all those various types of sexual violence is because we want to make sure we're recognizing that sexual violence comes in many, many different ways. For a long time in the movement to end sexual violence and beyond, we've really talked about sexual violence as rape or sexual assault, and just kind of in those very narrow terms that involve penetration. And we haven't always accounted for the various types of sexual violence that exist, which can make people feel unwelcome when we're doing that, right? So there's a lot, rape I think is a very emotional word. So there's a lot of feelings that someone might have, and it might be very difficult for someone to use that word because most people think of rape as like this stranger jumping out of the bushes. That's kind of like our societal definition of rape, who attacks someone. But then when it involves people we know, and especially people like our intimate partners, it can be very difficult for survivors to want to use that word. And we don't want to make survivors feel like they would have to use that word or that we would only serve them if they think it's rape, right? We want to make sure that we're including all different types of survivor experiences, and that we're also not giving value judgments to like different things being worse or better, or that the traumatic impact is going to be worse or better with different types of sexual violence, right? Because everyone's unique and everyone's going to have their own experiences. We also want to highlight that sometimes when we present that umbrella slide, some people will be like, well, some of these are illegal and some of these are not illegal, right? Some of them kind of walk that gray line of legality. And if they're reported to law enforcement, there's only so many things that law enforcement can do for the ones that aren't like very clearly illegal, right? But so we wanted to emphasize too that, especially when it comes to like our services, that it doesn't matter if the act was legal or illegal. We still want to make sure that we're serving all different types of survivors. Now, obviously, that's going to be different for the folks who've joined today who are law enforcement, right? Because you can only operate within what the law says. And so that can be tricky, but we just want to make sure that we still have that understanding that just because someone's coming to you and it's like a very gray issue and and there might not be anything you can do about it personally, you can still refer them to advocates, and you can still have that traumatic informed and empathetic response, even if it's something that you personally in the scope of your job can't work on. And then it's also not our role to define the survivor's experience. So something that comes up fairly frequently, I think, is maybe someone's not really sure what happened, or they're not sure how to describe what happened to them, but they know something happened and that something wasn't good. Sometimes people will be like, hey, like this happened. Do you think I was raped? Or do you think this is sexual assault? And I think as advocates, we can't answer that for survivors. We can define those terms for them, and we can provide them with information and educate them, but they need to define what happened to them for themselves. We can't, if someone comes to us and they describe an experience and we're like, this sounds like rape, if they're not using the word rape, we don't want to use the word rape when we're talking about it with them. We want to make sure we're mirroring their language, because sometimes if we are defining things for people, it feels like we're taking that control over their experience away from them. And we want to make sure survivors have full control in that regard. All right, so just some brief statistics about sexual violence. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced contact sexual violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 8 men have experienced non-contact sexual violence in their lifetime. And 1 in 2 transgender or gender non-conforming individuals have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. So we can see, I highly doubt it's a surprise to any of you that these statistics are so high, but we can see that these statistics are really, really quite high. We also know that most victims are targeted, right, by the people who are causing harm. So survivors the people who cause harm are looking at some of these different aspects of a potential victim per se. So they will look at the accessibility of that person. So how much access do they have to this potential victim? They're going to look at the vulnerability, right? Is this person vulnerable or easy to make vulnerable? And they're also going to look at the credibility, right? So if this person comes forward, are they going to be believed? And so perpetrators are thinking about these things, whether they're consciously thinking of it or subconsciously thinking of it. So in the chat, if you want to put what are some maybe different groups of people or characteristics or even things that are happening like in the moment that might put someone in this nexus, this triangle here of being accessible, of being vulnerable, and then of lacking credibility. If you want to put your answers in the chat. children, sex workers, age, gender, disability, special needs children, someone who, husband-wife relationship, someone under the influence, yes. People with disabilities, absolutely. Someone who's homeless, someone who's elderly, in poverty. Yeah, these are all great answers. Employees, yeah, so like an employee-employer relationship, that might be for especially particular jobs might have that. Yeah, these are all great answers. And so what I wanted to emphasize, I know one of you put that husband-wife relationship, right? So thinking beyond husband-wife relationship, I want to think about anyone who's in an intimate relationship. They might be in this triangle here, right? So if you're in an intimate relationship with someone, there's a lot of access, right? There's a lot of access there. There is also a lot of potential vulnerability. And I know Sam's going to get into this, and we'll get into this more later, but when there's already intimate partner violence present in the relationship, that can increase the vulnerability to intimate partner sexual violence. And then when it comes to credibility, in intimate partner sexual violence situations, we see from responders, right? So across the board, any type of responder, that responders are more likely to believe those rape myths. And so it lowers the about intimate partner sexual violence specifically. So it lowers the credibility of survivors because we have these ideas like sexual violence doesn't happen in relationships. Right. So I wanted to specifically highlight that people who are already experiencing intimate partner violence are definitely in this little triangle here. And then I also just kind of want to sum up this section about sexual violence, talking about the root causes. So I'm sure many of you have heard us talk about sexual violence being caused by power, right? So sexual violence at the end of the day is all about power and how someone may be exerting power over someone else. Again, whether it's consciously thought or not. And sexual violence is a tool of power and control in intimate partner relationships, as Sam's going to get into in more detail. But we also can't talk about sexual violence and power without talking about oppression, right? Because oppression is also very much linked to power. And sexual violence is actually used as a tool of oppression, right? So it's used as a tool to oppress different groups of people. And you all named a bunch of those different groups that sexual violence has been used against. And that could be to control those groups of people. That could just be to hurt those groups of people, or because it's easier to do, right? And so we have this link here of sexual violence being that tool and tactic of oppression. And then it's also all about power and power in the relationship between the person committing harm and the person who is being victimized.
All right, so let's talk about intimate partner violence. So we also use an umbrella for this as well. And so some of the things that fall under this umbrella for domestic violence is family violence. So violence that happens within the family, child abuse, elder abuse, teen dating violence, which is something that's just recently within the last 11 years been recognized through law. Animal abuse. We do a lot of work here at the coalition around animal abuse and the intersection between animal abuse and domestic violence. In fact, next month we're doing we're doing 3 webinars talking about animal abuse, talking about trauma about animal abuse, and we're going to be talking about co-sheltering models. So look for that. Stalking falls under this. Intimate partner sexual violence, which is why we're here today. And intimate partner violence. So intimate partner violence, the way I like to think about it, like domestic violence is kind of like, we think about it, like when we think about it, we think male perpetrator, female victim, but in intimate partner violence, it kind of expands that a little bit more to include more things like female perpetrator, male victim, or the LGBTQ if there's violence in those relationships. And it just gives us a more of a broad way of looking at domestic violence as a whole. But all of these things just kind of fall underneath domestic violence as we talk about it. So you'll hear the interchanging as I'm talking from domestic violence or intimate partner violence as this all continues. So domestic violence, so this is the Advocate's definition of domestic violence. It's a pattern of abusive or coercive behaviors in any intimate or familial relationship that are used to gain and maintain power and control over another person. And the key word here is pattern. Because otherwise it'd just be, I met someone, we hit it off, I hit them, and it's assault, right? When there's a pattern, and we're going to talk about the legal definition in just a minute. When there's a pattern, it helps folks really have a better understanding of the type of violence that's in their home or in their relationship, and also helps folks be able to get orders of protection. So the legal definition here in Arizona, ARS 133601 was passed in 1980. It's a tag crime, so domestic violence is not a crime here in the state of Arizona, it's a tag crime, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So basically what that means, so we have a two-part statute, and so crime, so it's basically you commit a crime. We have 30 crimes underneath the ARS 133601. You commit one of those crimes, and then you fall underneath the relationship test. So if you want to hit it one more time, Victoria. So this is current or former spouse, children in common, pregnant by the other, related by blood or marriage, current or former cohabitants, and current or former dating or sexual partners. And that one really does encapsulate teen dating violence. But so if you commit a crime, one of these 30 crimes, so let's just say like assault or the sharing of like revenge porn, like the sharing of nude photos, kidnapping, unlawful, oh shoot, what's the word? Not, it's the same, it's close to kidnapping. I can't think of it, but, no, that's not it. I apologize. Anyway, there's 30 different crimes that you can commit. And then if you fall, yes, thank you. Abduction is one of them. Yes, I appreciate that, Rachel. So, so one of the things, so you commit one of these crimes, if someone commits one of these crimes and then they fall underneath the relationship test, just one of these things, so current or former spouse or child in common, pregnant with the other, then basically when they go to get charged, the language changes and a tag crime and a DV tag is placed on their, as they go on them as they go through the legal system. So it's not, you can't just get arrested for domestic violence. You have to have committed a violent act against your partner or your children or your dating partner, and then law enforcement. You know, if you get arrested by law enforcement and then you go through the legal system, then they can determine from there how the relationship fits into that crime. I know, just lots. So in simpler terms, crime plus relationship equals domestic violence here in the state of Arizona. So who are victims? Victims can be anyone. It does not discriminate based on gender, race, ethnicity, religion, age, sexual orientation, class, education, ability status, legal status, etc. Survivors do not possess a set of universal characteristics or personality traits. It could be anyone sitting next to you at any time. Victims of domestic violence are not easily recognized because they are not usually covered in marks and bruises. Either they are really good about covering it up, or their perpetrator is really good about making sure that it is not going to be seen by folks. I was talking to a survivor a few months ago, and she she said that she was getting hit, that her perpetrator hit her in the top of the head because her hair covered up the bruises and the marks. So perpetrators are well aware of what they're doing for the most of the time, because they also do not want to be categorized, or they don't want to be found out. If there are injuries, victims have often learned to conceal them to avoid detection, suspicion, and shame. And victims are often blamed or stigmatized, making it harder to access help, right? So victims, a lot of times we blame them. What did you do to cause this to happen? Or what did you wear? Or what happened? Or what could you have said that set your partner off? So we often as a society like to blame the victim for like knowing that this might make our partner upset and then doing it anyway, which really is not the way domestic violence works. So just a general statistic: 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men were victims of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner with a negative impact such as injury, fear, concern for safety, and needing of services. So this is a really big statistic. This is an epidemic. This is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men. And 1 in 10 men is probably closer to 1 in 9 and 1 in 8, because men don't come forward as much as women do because of the way that we socialize young men. So this is just really, and a lot of times when I'm out in the community doing trainings, this number for men is so shocking for people because when we think about it, we don't think about men as being a victim of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and or we think of it as 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million. But as we can see, that's just not the case. So here, I'm sure most of you have seen this, the power and control wheel. It was, this is a little bit updated. It was adapted from the Duluth Institute. And so here we have emotional abuse, sexual coercion, harassment, technology misuse, which is kind of a new one that we've put on here. Intimidation, minimizing, denying, or blaming, using threats, misusing privilege, isolation, and economic abuse. So I would love for people to say, like, I know that we can see some of the words, but if you can think of anything to put in chat that maybe not be up here, or something that you've heard of or something that you know about for technology misuse, like I would love for you to put it in the chat just so that we can have a discussion about it. Or intimidation or using threats, because I think that it's really interesting, because we all have tracking. Perfect. Thank you, Ashley. Yes, tracking is a great way for technology to be misused. I think the thing that we have to remember with technology is that it has become an omnipresence. Spoofing, great, Karen. Technology has become an omnipresence, right? Like our perpetrators are not just hiding in bushes anymore, or waiting for us to get home and then climbing a tree with their binoculars to find us or to see us or to harass us or anything like that. It really is, we have a computer with us at all times, right? Like our phone is our computer, or we have a laptop, or all of the above. And we can be gotten a hold of at any time during the day. And perpetrators know that. So it's become an omnipresence. And what we need to remember as we're working with victims and we're working with folks, is that we really need to remember that it's not them being on Facebook, and it's not the technology that's the problem. The abuse is the problem. Yes, catfishing, love it. So scary. There's even a show, it weirds me out. Thank you, Jesse. Monitoring chat and text history without full consent. Yep. Or grabbing somebody's phone to check their history, or all of those things. But yeah, technology can be really misused in our society, and because it's so easy. It's so easy. About 97% of the folks that are coming into shelter have had some sort of technology misuse perpetrated against them. And that's a lot, right? Like that's a lot. So we need to make sure, and technology is hard to prove. So we need to make sure that when people are coming to us and they feel like that they're being watched, and there is a history of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, we need to make sure that we're really listening to those folks because there's a good chance that their gut is telling them the truth and that something really is going on with their phone. What I really wanted to bring to light here when we're looking at the wheel, and something just to keep in mind as we continue moving on, is that the interesting thing about the wheel is that we see all these pie pieces and we see all these things, and we've said all these things. Thank you for everyone who has talked in the chat. But what we're seeing here with this wheel is that you can do all of these things without ever laying a hand on someone. And that's really powerful for survivors to hear, because our society and our movement has done a really good job of talking to us about, of showing us what domestic violence looks like. Like when we think of it, right, we think of black eyes and bruises and strangulation and all these things. But we don't think about the economic impact someone has to take on when they decide to leave their partner, or if they've had money stolen, or if they have to give their paycheck up every week. And we don't really think about the technology misuse or the intimidation tactics that someone uses, or the isolation, which is such a good tactic for, and I don't want to say good, but it's such a powerful tactic, using isolation. And it's just something that we don't really think of when we think about domestic violence. We think about the black eyes and the broken arms and someone wearing long sleeves and sunglasses, and it's not always like that. There's usually something here in this wheel that is happening as well, if not many more things from this wheel. And so we need to really make sure that we keep in mind that it's not just about those things, and that you can do all of these things that we're talking about right now without ever laying a hand on someone. And that's powerful survivors when they hear that, especially if they've never considered any of these things as being if they've never thought about how their relationship is unhealthy. So I just wanted to bring that to light as we're looking at the wheel. Go ahead, Victoria. Thank you.
I just realized I forgot to unmute myself. So now that we kind of have that foundational knowledge about domestic violence and sexual violence, we're going to really get into what is that intimate partner sexual violence piece. So we like to use visuals at the coalition. So you'll see us use different Venn diagrams to describe things. Intimate partner sexual violence is really where intimate partner violence and sexual violence intersect. And this might, I think maybe the classic example that we think of is like marital rape, but it looks a lot broader than marital rape. So in the chat, can you put, how does intimate partner sexual violence look differently or show up differently than non-intimate partner sexual violence? So basically, what can intimate partner sexual violence look like? And I'll give you some time to think about that as well. Like if you were filling out this umbrella, what would you put underneath the umbrella of intimate partner sexual violence? Oh, so controlling whether someone takes birth control. Yeah, so that's reproductive coercion. We're going to talk about that. Patterns of sexual coercion, forcing a partner to do sexual acts they don't want to do, forcing to act out pornography, not using condoms, taking unwanted pictures, controlling who they hang out or talk to, threatening them. Yeah, so I want you all to think of, so Sam was just talking about in the power and control wheel, how a lot of that is not about laying a finger on someone. So it's not about some of that physical violence. So I want you all to think about what that looks like for intimate partner sexual violence, right? What are all the things that aren't necessarily like that sexual assault or rape piece? Filming sex acts without their knowledge and sharing them, or sharing them. Karen, I'm not sure if you mean like sharing photos of them or sharing them with other people to have sex with, like that sexual exploitation piece. Comparing them to sexual partners in the past. Absolutely. Thanks, Karen. So it was sharing them with other people to have sex with. Yeah, so I think y'all have come up with a bunch of really good answers. Um, and I think it shows that I think you all know what sexual violence and intimate partner relationships can look like. And so that's really good, because sometimes it can be really difficult for us to think about, but because it can show up in these really subtle ways. So I know a number of you mentioned that reproductive coercion piece, right? So reproductive coercion can look like controlling someone's birth control options. It could look like stealthing, which is when someone removes a condom after they've told you they're going to use one. Or it could just be refusal to wear a condom, right? As a part of reproductive coercion. It could be forcing someone to have children, or it could be forcing someone to have an abortion if they don't want to. And that's a form of intimate partner sexual violence. And that can show up in pressuring someone and forcing someone to have sex because someone wants them to get pregnant, right? Someone mentioned sharing their partner with other people to have sex with. So that's that sexual exploitation piece, right? And a lot of you mentioned emotional manipulation and a bunch of the different sexual coercion tactics that can be used. And I really, really wanted to highlight sexual coercion in intimate relationships, because I think for a lot of folks, this is possibly one of the most difficult aspects of intimate partner violence to identify, right? Because it can look like it is that emotional manipulation piece, and making someone feel bad about themselves, potentially. And it's one of the most common perpetration tactics. And we'll see when we talk about the statistics that it shows up in intimate partner relationships at vastly, vastly higher rates than non-intimate partner relationships when it's used as a sexual violence tactic. So we also, like I said, the classic marital rape or partner rape, right? And making someone penetrate their partner. I highlighted stalking as purple here too, because you'll remember from our previous umbrellas that stalking was one we had on the SV side and one that Sam had on her DV umbrella. But at the end of the day, I want to make it clear that all of these forms of sexual violence can show up in intimate partner relationships, and it can be very, very difficult to identify for a lot of victims and to name it as sexual violence. They might just think, or they might just name it as a negative sexual experience or a bad sex situation. And so it is important for us as advocates and anyone else responding to sexual violence to be able to recognize that this is also intimate partner sexual violence. So to get into some statistics about intimate partner sexual violence, almost 1 in 5 women have experienced intimate partner sexual violence in their lifetime. And about 1 in 12 men have experienced intimate partner sexual violence in their lifetime. And like Sam said, the statistics for men are probably lower, or they're probably higher than what they are on the screen here, because men don't report as frequently. When it comes to either rape or being made to penetrate in a relationship, almost half of all female victims of rape and over half of all male victims of forced penetration reported that at least one perpetrator was an intimate partner. And I gotta be honest, when I was putting the slide together, I was actually really surprised by the stat for men. So the male victims of forced penetration. I really was expecting it to be, I was expecting it to be high, but I was expecting it to be lower than 50%. And so that was really surprising to me, and it might be surprising for some of you all today. And like I mentioned with sexual coercion, 75% of female survivors of any form of sexual violence and 66% of male survivors of any form of sexual violence reported that there was sexual coercion and that one of their perpetrators was an intimate partner, right? So that is extremely high and really shows how sexual coercion is used as that tactic in intimate partner sexual violence situations.
Let's talk about, I forgot my mute. Let's talk about some risk factors for IPSV. So probably one of the biggest factors for IPSV is that there's already non-sexual violence being presented, which is a very large risk factor, so they're already living in a domestic violence relationship. The women tend to be, it tends to be more likely younger women with that reproductive coercion part, like that Victoria was talking about. It can definitely, rapid repeat pregnancies for a young woman, that it can look like that. It happens to a risk factor is American Indian and African American women. They have a much higher rate of domestic and sexual violence than anyone else, than their white counterparts. Divorced or separated at greater risk of being sexually assaulted by a former partner. So we know that risk goes up when people decide to leave. And this could be a power play for someone as they are, as their partner is getting ready to file for an order of protection, file for divorce, file for child support. It could be a tactic used to exert power. And then previous victimization of violence in a family of family of origin of victim. So if victimization had already happened or violence was already happening in the family for that victim, then there could be a higher risk because they may not know what to look for when sexual assault happens to them in their partnership, because they were already experiencing this in their home growing up, or some form of victimization as they were growing up. So perceptions of IPSV, sexual violence doesn't happen in relationships. So we see this a lot, that it just doesn't, it can't happen in a relationship when we're with someone, because, when we first start dating, we start giving consent, we give consent, and that consent just basically carries on throughout that relationship. But that's not really true, because sometimes when people are being abused in the relationship, they start to say no. And they start to feel uncomfortable around their partner. And if that person says no, then consent is revoked and sexual violence can happen. This might be considered wifely duties. So it's your wifely, very gendered roles within the home. So this could be your wifely duties. You have to give me this. We have an agreement or whatever consent has been given before. Traditional beliefs about marriage and gender roles, part of that wifely duties part, but just I'm the man, I get this, you're the woman, you get this, or even if they're male identified in that relationship or female identified, there could be a gender belief, a traditional belief in that relationship. Perceived as not as bad as other forms of sexual violence. That's because you're already in an intimate relationship with someone, it might be perceived that sexual violence, and we still think about sexual violence as being stranger danger and not being part of the relationships that we have in our life. And a marital rape wasn't illegal across the United States until 1993, which, if you think about it, was not very long ago. And so this movement really took off in the 1980s. We started forming coalitions, we started forming laws all across the country. So 13 years later, it wasn't illegal in the United States. That's such a short time. And there's still a lot of people that don't believe that rape is a problem in a marriage or in a relationship. And the thing that's really interesting about the perceptions is that it's not only the perpetrator or our society that think this way, that it's your wifely duties or traditional beliefs. it's also that it could also be that victim or that survivor living in that relationship because of how they grew up, or how, because no one was able to talk to them about sex or healthy relationships when they were younger. So here we've got a couple quotes from survivors. So just talking about perceptions. So the survivor says, "I thought it was my duty to have sexual intercourse with my husband, even if I didn't want to. When he wanted to have intercourse, instead of telling me what he wanted, he said, I want to use you, and that made me feel like a disposable object." From another survivor, "They think it's not rape and they have to do it because she's the wife, because I'm married and I have to do my duties." Speaking to that wifely duties. "And then my parents told me that I have to take it, and that we have to until we die, that I have to take everything." So these are just some of the perceptions, like not only of that, of the way that they grew up, but also like the continuation of that you have to take it. So these survivors have these outside forces telling them that you have to stay, like that our culture doesn't believe in divorce, or our religion doesn't believe in divorce, or just as a family, like you can't get divorced. There's never been divorce in our family before. And so they're suffering in silence most of the time, these survivors that are coming to us that need help.
And one thing that I want to add too is that I think one of the big myths that we have as a society about intimate partner sexual violence, I think is what Sam was saying at the beginning, when people think that if you consented to sex with a person you're in a relationship once, then you've consented every single time. Right. But we know that we need to have consent each time that someone engages in any kind of sexual activity, right? Consent is essential no matter how many times they've had sex before. And we even still have laws that uphold that myth. So if any of you have heard of rape shield laws, so rape shield laws prevent someone's sexual history from being used against them in court. There are many loopholes throughout the country in these laws, including in Arizona, where the sexual history with the person in question who has accused them of sexual violence is able to be used against them in court, right? So if they have consented to them in the past, this can sometimes be used against people in court to say that they consented. And so these myths are still upheld in the legal system. And then they're also really prevalent, even though I think when we talk about them in trainings, I think it seems very black and white. Like, of course, like these are all myths, we know this, but then when it plays out in like real life situations, it can be harder to see, and it can be hard. They can be like kind of gray about how consent works and what it looks like within relationships, which can make it really difficult for responders to know what intimate partner sexual violence even is. And so that's why we're trying to make it as clear as possible that it can look all these different ways.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. So responders, how responders treat the myths. So rape myths are particularly impactful on responders for IPSV. And responders are less likely to believe IPSV occurred because and I'm going to let Victoria talk about what rape myths are and talk a little bit about how that plays into this and how responders treat survivors. But then up until 2005, spousal rape was treated differently under the law in Arizona. So like I just showed you, so 1993 across the United States, but even until 2005, which was only 15 years ago, spousal rape was treated differently under the law in Arizona. So that's something that we really need to take into consideration when we're working with folks, and take into consideration our own views on how we look at rape and rape myths and sexual coercion, and can this even happen in a relationship. So Victoria, do you want to talk about what rape myths are?
Yeah, so the previous slide, I think I'm echoing a little bit. Oh, it's cleared up now. Okay. So on the previous slide, all of these things that we went over are different forms of what rape myths can look like, other than this, the change in the law. Like intimate partner violence being perceived as not as bad as other forms of sexual violence. And what this can look like when responders show up to respond to intimate partner sexual violence, it could look like someone saying, well, you're a man, so like you want to have sex all the time, right? So you can't have been sexually assaulted by your partner. That doesn't make sense. Um, and it can just look like that lack of belief, or not even taking the sexual violence seriously. And so like that's why we have this information about the spousal rape laws being treated differently, because in the past it was viewed as a lesser crime, on like the how crimes are prosecuted, like what type of felony they are, all of that. It was viewed as differently than other forms of sexual violence. And so that can show up in really impactful ways in the criminal justice system, and then also in our services, right? If we're not taking it as seriously as other forms of sexual violence. And then I see in the chat, there was a question about why we say rape, or it says rape for female or forced penetration for male. So just to clarify, when we're talking about rape, we're talking about someone being penetrated, right? So anyone could be penetrated, right? Anally, vaginally, orally. And then forced penetration is when someone is forced to penetrate someone else. And sometimes it does look like on our statistics as rape is women and forced penetration is for men. And this is really just because of how the CDC has analyzed and synthesized the data, because we can't pull out some of the nuances. They pull that out. And so we have both of them on there just to make sure that we are having some of the best statistics that we possibly can. And then that, but we want to be really clear that anyone can be sexually assaulted or raped, and anyone can be made to penetrate that. I see a few more questions coming in. So someone's asked, why does the CDC handle those statistics? I really don't know the answer to that. I think they've handled these statistics for like 20 years, I think now, maybe even 30 years. I'm not sure when they started collecting these, but they're from the National Intimate Partner Sexual Violence Survey. And these are statistics that are published on a fairly regular basis. And I think it's because sexual violence and intimate partner violence are considered public health issues. That's why the CDC has that. And then someone else has asked, what is animal abuse in domestic violence? Having sexual contact with an animal. So Caitlin, I think having sexual contact with an animal to hurt a partner, that could definitely be a form of intimate partner sexual violence.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that could fall under that umbrella. I think today we're not focusing specifically on that, but it definitely could be a tactic for sure.
All right. So women who don't identify as domestic violence victims because they aren't being hit, or whose sexual assaults are more coercive than physically violent, may continue to fall through the cracks when IPSV is not clearly defined and given prominence of its own. So we felt like it was really important for us to put this in here in this training, because we need to start helping people that this has happened to, and we need to start identifying that this is a real thing that happens to folks in our society. And we need to also get over the fact that, like, we need to be able to say, we can't be good, effective advocates or first responders if we can't ask about these things, if we can't even say the word sex or sexual violence, if it's too hard or too taboo, we really need to work on getting over some of those things, if we want to continue to do this work, because we don't want people to fall through the cracks, right? We want to help survivors and we want to help victims start healing. Like, and we can't, and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, like, they can't start healing if no one's ever asked them about this. So like, if somebody comes into a domestic violence program and they're doing their safety planning and they're doing all these, their intake, and they're having classes about things and all of this, but they're not getting to something that was so horrific for them, maybe because no one's ever asked them about it, then that's problematic, because they might be able to heal from all the other things that were done or said to them, but there's still a piece missing. There's still a piece missing in their healing because no one's ever talked to them or helped them even see that this was problematic in their relationship, for all the reasons that we just talked about, right? So for all the reasons that, like, the wifely duties, like, I grew up that way, like the way that the victim or that survivor might be socialized, we have to be able to ask questions about this. It may not be in the first or second meeting that we have with someone, because that's probably not the best idea to start off with that. But it is important for, at some point when we're having conversations, to figure out what's happened and how and what they need, and really listening to them and what their needs are. We might be forgetting and letting them fall through the cracks because as responders and as advocates, we may be so scared to ask a question about someone's sexual coercion or sexual violence that happened in their relationship. And I just wanted to bring this up because it's just really important that we move past this barrier in talking to survivors, and that we're comfortable saying the word sex, saying the word sexual violence, saying the word sexual coercion, because we have to be able to talk about it so that these survivors know that someone cares, and know that someone listened, and so that we know that they're getting the resources that they need so that they can start their healing. Because we want that, right? Like, we want them to at some point start on that healing journey that they need, and they can't do that fully. We're not helping them. We're not helping their whole self, if we can't even talk about these things with the survivors that we're working with. So it's just, I know I went off on a tangent and I apologize. It's just really, like, near and dear to me that we are able to talk about these things with people. So thank you. So what are some differences between, thank you, Karen. What are some differences between IPSV and IPSV? So IPSV compared to non-IPSV sexual violence, sometimes I feel like this can be confusing. So IPSV compared to just, like, not, I don't want to say just, but to sexual assault. So higher levels of physical injury may happen because there's more of an intimate relationship there. It's not just like they've lived with someone. They know about someone's quirks and someone's, like, how they feel and how they're going to make them feel. So there could be a higher level of physical injury in that relationship. There's usually financial dependence from that survivor. There could be safety concerns like OPs, shelters, child support, and DCS. So safety concerns that like, we need to work with these people to help them with that. And they're more likely to have heard from folks out in the community or from family or from friends that you need to just put up with it, that marriage is hard, and why don't you just leave? So we don't really want to say things like that for folks. It's very victim blaming, especially the why don't you just leave. It should really be reframed as, well, why does he hit, or why does he or she use these tactics against me or against you. So IPSV compared to non-IPSV sexual violence. So there's a climate of sexual violence. Usually there's multiple victimizations because you're there, you're like that part, like you're in a relationship with this person. So it usually happens more than once, different types, different reasons. There's difficulty naming the acts as sexual violence. This is why we have to be able to talk to people. Victoria talked about before that, our advocate's role is not to define what the experience is, but it's also our job to help a survivor or a victim name that violence that was perpetrated against them, because if they can't name it or put a finger on it, or they don't know that it happened, then they can't continue with that healing journey that they need to be on at some point when they're ready for that. And so we need to be able to help them name those things. That's why the wheel is so effective and why we use them so much, because we can sit down with someone and say, like, if they don't understand, if they don't know that they're in this violent relationship or this unhealthy relationship, we can sit down with them and say, have any of these things ever happened to you? Mm-hmm. And, you might get a, yep, that, yep, that, yep, that, and stuff. And so it's important that we're comfortable saying the words like sexual coercion, sexual violence, so that we can help those survivors name those violent things that have happened to them. There's usually a higher level of anal or oral rape, and there's a longer lasting trauma, because this is supposedly somebody that loves you, somebody that you are in a relationship with. It's not just a casual friend or an acquaintance that or someone that you went on a date with. This is someone who you maybe have told vows to, you might have children with, you've been in a long-term relationship with this person, and there really needs to, and so the trauma might last longer because of those things, and more psychological and health impacts may be happening. So more because of the worrying, and you don't know what's going to happen next. There might be more stomach issues, more headaches, more internal pain because of the lasting trauma that's happening. So IPSV compared to IPV. So higher levels of shame, self-blame, and low self-esteem. Again, because we're in this relationship with someone, it is someone that supposedly loves us the most and is supposed to be like our ride or die, is hurting us in some way. There's higher rates of PTSD, depression, and risk of suicide. Higher rates of trauma symptoms. There's negative feelings towards sex, and this can continue on as they continue on if they were able to leave this abusive relationship. This negative feeling, especially if no one's ever talked about it with them and they haven't gotten the whatever healing help that they need, this might continue on in other relationships. And lower levels of well-being, positive coping skills, and self-efficacy. So they might be coping, but it might not be what is the healthiest form of coping. So maybe they've taken up substance abuse, or maybe they talk badly about themselves and just have a really, really nasty way of thinking about themselves, which falls into that negative feelings about sex and higher rates of depression and suicide risk and PTSD. And then again, some more IPSV compared to IPV. Increased risk of strangulation, lacerations, and knife wounds, because these things are easy access for someone living inside the home. And strangulation, there's a power issue there that happens as well when it comes to sexual violence. So strangulation is quite common. Increased risk of reproductive coercion, which we've talked about before. Basically, Victoria talked about, the outcomes of pregnancy or the outcomes of using birth control. Increased risk of gynecological problems if there's any tearing or anything like that. More likely to develop STIs and HIV or sex if someone is forced to have sex because of the tearing, this can definitely leave someone more exposed for STIs and HIV. More likely to seek help and attempt to leave, but also more likely to return to partner. Because again, we're not having these conversations with folks as they're trying to leave. And you do have that outside, survivors have that outside influence of family, either their family or their perpetrator's family. There could be outside barriers of like children. Why can't I stay with mom? Why can't I stay with dad? And so there is a more likely chance that they're going to return to their partner. And they may not also understand, they may not have put a name as to what was happening to them. And so there's more likely a chance that they'll return. The women who experience IPSV are 7.6 times more likely to be murdered by their intimate partner. That's a huge number. That's a big number until we started doing this work, I hadn't even thought about it. And that's such a huge number to think about, that this is, you know, they're more likely to be murdered by an intimate partner. We hear this with, you know, if there's a firearm in the home or animal abuse occurs, but we don't really think about it from a sexual violence point of view. So just something to think about. Barriers to reporting IPSV. Just like DV or SV, there are barriers. So belief in societal myths of IPSV. So if you go to a responder or law enforcement or a healthcare worker, and there is a societal belief of the myths of IPSV, like it's your wifely duties, or you did nothing to help that, or rape can't occur in a relationship, then it might be harder for someone to come forward. And then difficulty defining the act as sexual violence. So, right, we talked about that. It could be really difficult for all the reasons that we've talked about. So, like for someone's socialization as they grew up, they may not be able to put a name on what happened to them. Concerns about anonymity or confidentiality. So, because sex is still so taboo, and sexual violence is still so taboo, and we don't really like to talk about it in our society, and it's really difficult to come forward. There could be some question about someone not being able to, they could be really uncomfortable talking about sex, or talking about the sex that the sexual violence that happened to them, and making sure that we talk about what our role is with confidentiality, and that we do hold confidentiality with our survivors is really important. A fear of retaliation by partner or others. Fear, guilt, or embarrassment. And I would also throw in shame in that. There's a lot of shame that comes with this, along with that shame and guilt and embarrassment. Perception that police or legal system won't take it seriously. Society's emphasis on being in a relationship. So this one is pretty interesting. Society's emphasis on being in a relationship, because, right, like we're still having people, for single people and single adults, we're still having folks talk to us so when are you getting married? Or there's an expectation of bringing someone home to meet the parents, and if you're not, then you're a spinster, or you're a playboy, or all of these things. And society really celebrates relationships and doesn't necessarily celebrate singledom. And so that could be something too, like, especially if it's a cultural thing, being in a culture or a religion or religious culture that really emphasizes relationships, can be really difficult for someone to leave the relationship and be alone for a while. Biases that intimate offenders are not as dangerous as stranger offenders. So thinking that just because someone loves someone doesn't mean that they can't be an offender of sexual violence or an offender of domestic violence. So that could be a bias out there. And economic and financial dependence. So economic and financial dependence, if that person works, if your perpetrator is the sole breadwinner or makes more money, and that other person is a stay-at-home parent or doesn't make as much money, there could be an economic and financial dependence, along with housing. Housing is a huge factor when it comes to being a barrier to reporting abuse.
All right, so I just want to pause to see if there's any questions. I don't see any in the Q&A box, but please put them in the Q&A box if you have them. All right, so if we get some questions as we go, I will be checking the Q&A box just to make sure that we're answering all the questions. So now we're really going to get into the meat of how are we responding to intimate partner sexual violence survivors, right? What can we do? So it's important. So regardless of your profession, if you're an advocate, if you're law enforcement, if you're a forensic examiner, regardless of any of that, I want you to keep some of these things in mind because we can never fully anticipate a survivor's needs. All survivors have their own unique experiences, and we might be able to anticipate some of the general needs that survivors may have, but sometimes we have no idea what survivors' needs are going to be. And so we just want to make sure we're keeping that in mind with all the work we do, and that we also can't tell a survivor what to do, right? We might have our own thoughts and feelings about what we think a survivor should do, but we should never ever tell a survivor what to do or let them know that we're having thoughts and feelings about what they should do, right? We want to make sure that they have as much control over the situation as possible. I also want us to keep some of these guiding principles in mind. So again, regardless of our profession, we can keep all of these principles in mind for how we're responding to a survivor of intimate partner sexual violence, right? So we want to make sure that our response is trauma-informed, right? So the goal here is we don't want to be re-traumatizing survivors, and we want to co-create an environment with survivors where they feel safe and empowered, because then we can have just a better experience for that survivor. We also want to make sure we're thinking about safety. So we're going to talk in detail about safety planning for an intimate partner sexual violence survivor. But in general, when we're talking about safety, we're not just talking about safety planning. We're talking about safety to access our services or safety to report if you're law enforcement, right? So we want to make sure we're predictable, right? We're doing what we say we're going to do. We're returning phone calls. We're offering support with our helpline or hotline if we have one, right? And so we're not ignoring survivors because they're difficult to work with, right? We're still responding to them no matter what. We also want to make sure we're clearly describing our confidentiality policies and what our roles are, right? So confidentiality looks different for law enforcement than advocates, than forensic nurses, right? We all have different confidentiality rules under the law. We want to normalize survivors' reactions to trauma. And we also want to have healthy boundaries with survivors. When it comes to trust, we want to talk about how are we sharing information with survivors, right? Some people need a lot of information. Some people don't want as much information, right? Every survivor is different. We want to make sure our roles are clearly defined so that a survivor understands what exactly your role is and what you can do for them, right? So if you are an advocate at a county attorney's office, what's your role there? Versus if you're an advocate at a family advocacy center or an advocate at a community-based program, those roles are going to look a little bit different. They're going to be similar, of course, but they might look a little bit different in terms of like what you are able to do in that role. And then of course, your roles obviously going to look different if you are law enforcement, if you're a patrol, or if you're a detective, or maybe if you're a forensic examiner. What are all those roles? It's a lot for survivors to keep track of, but it's also important that survivors know exactly what our roles are. We want to make sure we're not sharing survivor information. And this is also true when we have our meetings, right? Like our sexual assault response team meetings or our coordinated community response team meetings, that we're not oversharing survivor information in those meetings, right? We're making sure we have those requests for information if we do share with other agencies, and that we understand how investigations can work, and that if we share information as an advocate to law enforcement, how that can impact an investigation. And we always want to make sure we have survivor consent if that is something that the survivor wants us to do. We also always want to provide choice and control. So anyone can do this. Just think of all of the touch points where a survivor can make a decision, no matter how small, and make sure you ask if the survivor wants to make a decision about a particular thing. So this could be as simple as where they want to sit in the room that you're talking to them in, or where they want to meet, right? If you're a mobile advocate and you can meet up with them somewhere, where do they want to meet that feels safe for them? And we also want to support survivors in all their decisions, even if we don't agree with them, right? So if a survivor decides not to report or not to have a forensic exam, we should still support them, even if maybe we want them to report, right? We should never ever pressure someone to report. It should always be the survivor's decision. We want to provide opportunities for collaboration. And so this is really talking about survivors being able to collaborate with each other and to be with each other. So this could be a support group. This could be a way, like an advisory council for survivors to be on to influence the agency that you work for. Empowerment, so this could be highlighting survivor strengths. And again, this also could be including survivor in our agencies and decision making. And finally, we want to make sure we're having that anti-oppression lens. So this is really recognizing the impact oppression has on many survivors' lives, right, before the intimate partner sexual violence even occurred, right? So this could be racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, anything like that. Is going to have an impact on survivors and could be already traumatic for survivors before their experience with intimate partner sexual violence happens. And then sometimes the work that we do in our different roles, that might impact how a survivor feels about us, right? So if we are working as a forensic examiner and we're in a healthcare facility, and a survivor has had negative impacts with the healthcare facility, or with healthcare in general, not with that particular facility, but with healthcare in general because of a disability that they have, right? That might make them really skeptical about working with forensic examiners. That might make them not want to work with us. And that's okay for them to feel that way. And we should never ever judge them for feeling that way, right? We should just do our best in our role to not cause further harm to that person. And keep in mind, healing's different for everyone, and survivors have unique needs, and they're going to be the experts on their own lives. So when we're responding, we want to be prepared for any type of emotion. Our emotions can guide a survivor's emotions, right? So if we become very agitated, that might cause a survivor to become more agitated. So we want to make sure we're staying calm, and that we are staying empathetic, and having maybe more of a quiet demeanor instead of kind of getting riled up, which can happen sometimes. We want to be open-minded and attentive, and we want to provide undivided attention, right? So we don't want to be checking our phone or getting distracted with other conversations. We want to be giving them our full attention. And we also never want to make assumptions about a survivor's experience, right? We don't want to assume what they've experienced or how they've experienced it. We want to keep our tone low and even, calm. We still want to be serious and concerned while also being compassionate, right? We don't want to make light of the situation, but we want to make sure that we are being respectful. We want to respond in a non-judgmental manner, I think one of a really big barrier for folks coming forward about intimate partner sexual violence is that fear of judgment. And so we want to make it clear that we aren't going to judge them no matter what they tell us. They might tell us something we've never heard before, but we want to make sure we're still not judging them no matter what. And then we also want to avoid speaking too slow or too fast. We want to engage in active listening. So really being attentive when we're listening to them, listening with empathy, validating their emotions, being patient. And we always want to spend more time listening rather than speaking, right? And so depending on what your role is, right? So some of you may be having to ask questions, right? Like if you're doing the forensic exam and you're filling out the questionnaire form, or if you're an investigator, we want to make sure we're using open-ended questions and we're not leading them anywhere. And then as they answer, that we're providing that active listening as well. Some things to say. So if your role is not an advocate and you're not really used to responding to intimate partner sexual violence, we have a few tips for just how to respond in general. So you could say, I understand why you feel that way. That makes sense. I don't blame you for what happened. I'm sorry. That's understandable. That's terrible. I believe you, right? If your role is something that would allow you to say that, you can say that you believe them. That can go a really long way to making someone feel safe. Thank you for trusting me with this. I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's not your fault. I haven't heard that before, but it doesn't make it any less true. It makes sense. There's no right way to feel or deal with this. This type of violence can be especially traumatic. I've heard similar things from other survivors. It's normal to have mixed feelings toward your partner, right? So that normalizing of someone's experience.
So all providers should screen for IPSV. Law enforcement should screen all domestic violence reports for IPSV, as sexual violence is another crime that needs to be investigated. So just some screening information. So law enforcement should screen. Conviction rates for IPSV are even lower than non-IPSV. Dropping the case or dropping the investigation at a request of victim is more common for IPSV than non-IPSV because there's more barriers. An impact of rape myths on the partner for partner rape is very impactful on the investigation and the prosecution. So we just need to be really careful about like how we go about talking to folks and make sure that we're doing the screenings for every domestic violence case that we come across. And forensic examiners should screen all sexual violence patients for strangulation and all strangulation patients for sexual violence. An advocate should screen all domestic violence survivors for sexual violence to know how to best provide advocacy. So some screening tips for IPSV. Before asking questions, decide what you will do if the victim provides information that indicates a sexual assault. So we don't want to be like, have a shocked look on our face. I'm sorry. So screening means to ask about it, to screen for it, to make sure that we're talking to people about it so that it's part of their advocacy, if that's what we're looking at, or to make sure they're getting the resources that they need to continue on, either for their healthcare or law enforcement or advocacy. Does that help? Okay, cool. So so before asking questions, decide what you will do. So we don't want to be taken by surprise. We don't want to have a surprise look on our face. When we're talking to people, we want to be very comfortable, which is why I say, if you need to practice saying the word sex in the mirror to yourself, please do it. Just because we don't want to make someone feel like they're abnormal for talking to us about this. Questions should use specific language, clarify what you mean by force, pressure, or threat. Not everyone thinks about these things or knows about these things. And so we want to make sure that we're able to have a really clear, so that they have a clear understanding of what we're trying to figure out, what they're trying to tell us. Because again, someone may not know how exactly to describe what's happened to them. And so we really need to, so for our notes or whatever we're doing for our advocacy, for our, if we're writing stuff down, we need to be able to have specific language. Use words such as sexual activity, intimate experience, etc., given that many victims may not consider what happened to them rape. So and then use open-ended questions so that it gets them talking, so that they can have more of a conversation instead of yes or no answers. So some possible screening questions. Are there times when sex between you and your partner is unpleasant for either of you? What happens to make it unpleasant? Have you ever been intimate with your partner because you were afraid of him or her? Have you ever been intimate with your partner when you didn't want to? And have you ever given into a sexual encounter with your partner to avoid fighting or being hurt? And do you and your partner ever disagree about sex? How do you resolve those disagreements? So these are just some questions that you can ask to kind of move that conversation along without being really explicit in the way that we ask those questions. So usually IPSV is the last thing a victim discloses, and it's often because we don't ask about it. So this just goes back to my whole thing that I was talking about earlier, because we don't ask about it, because even we as advocates, or we as law enforcement, or we as healthcare providers or first responders, we are, even because of the way we have been socialized, are really uncomfortable talking about these things. But we really need to make sure that we're having these conversations with our community members so that they can heal properly.
All right, so this next section is really going to be focused on providing advocacy for intimate partner sexual violence survivors. And so in the chat, I want you to think about this question and answer it in the chat. What are some of your biggest challenges, concerns, or fears in providing advocacy to survivors of intimate partner sexual violence? Not all at once, everyone. Oh, here we go. So triggering them, survivor returning home after the assault with the partner still living there, that you're not able to help the victims, that others are afraid to talk about sex and don't want you to either, biases or personal experiences, whether they have to be the perfect victim to obtain justice, how to contain those emotions, and next steps. I see someone also said that they've had advocates who are just uncomfortable talking about sexual issues. Worry about saying the wrong thing or upsetting the survivor, that they keep going back, or that they feel that it's their fault. Yeah, so I think a lot of these answers are really, really common across advocates, about just not knowing what the right thing to do is, worrying about saying the wrong thing, all of that. And I think we're gonna get into some different tools that you all can use in your advocacy. And we want to keep in mind that sometimes when we're providing advocacy, we can feel helpless, right? Like there's some things that we do that we're like, yes, I'm definitely helping this person. I feel like I'm doing a thing. This is going really well. But then sometimes we just feel helpless in our role, right? Like we don't know the right thing to say or to do. And all we can do is listen. And I want to remind you all that listening is a service, and it's this tool of advocacy. And it can feel like we're not doing anything, But when we're listening to someone, we're providing them a service. And sometimes people just want to talk about what's happened to them, and that's all they want from us. So I think I wanted you all to answer this question so that you wouldn't feel alone, and that, because I figured we'd get some pretty similar responses from folks. But I also want to empower you all to know that you are providing those services, and just to give you some tools to strengthen how you provide those services. So our Venn diagram is back, but here now it's more focused on what advocacy can look like. And so this diagram is really about what are some of the most common tools that we use in our advocacy. So when we're talking about intimate partner violence in general, some of those really common tools that we have are things like shelter and housing advocacy. We do lots of orders of protection. We can do that physical safety planning piece, different types of legal assistance, public benefits assistance, right? And like all of those things feel like we're really doing something too, right? They're tangible, right? We can see a result. Like, yes, we got this person their SNAP benefits. Like, this is exactly what they needed. This is really helpful. We're doing great. Right, so those can feel really tangible. When it comes to sexual violence advocacy, a lot of the advocacy skills, they don't look or feel as tangible, right? So we have active listening, right? Sometimes survivors just want to tell us their story, and that's all they want. We're providing that emotional validation. Sometimes we're talking about safety in our bodies, safety emotionally. And so we have safety planning looks a little bit different for sexual violence survivors. And then we also might be talking about healthy sex, right? And healthy sexuality. And so when Sam was talking earlier about being afraid to say sex, sometimes we're not afraid to talk about sexual violence, but we are afraid to talk about healthy sex and good sex and pleasure and what that looks like. And I'm not saying we don't talk about any of this. The list that we have under sexual violence advocacy. A lot of you all definitely do this with intimate partner violence advocacy. These are just some of the more common tools that we use with these different types of victimizations, right? And so we want to keep in mind that intimate partner sexual violence often need both or a combination of these tools. And then in the chat, Nora said that some of the most challenging things is we do all we can and we have the best advocacy, and in the end, there's these things we can't control, like the criminal justice system or law enforcement failing the survivor. So advocates may feel helpless and feel like we don't have any more resources for the survivor. Thank you, Nora. I think that's absolutely true. And that's why I wanted you all to share, right? Because I think that helpless feeling is really common, and that the active listening and guiding toward healing resources is still really important, even when we can't control anything else that's going on. So we're going to go in depth about what some of these tools can look like, so that we have them ready to go when you are working with different survivors. So fundamentally, we want to talk about advocacy being that partnership with survivors, and that restores survivors' voice, choice, and power, right? So we want to make sure we're highlighting those choices survivors have, and making sure that they feel that they're gaining their power back, right? And so this can take many different forms. And so we've kind of broken it down into these sections, and we're going to go in detail on most of them, but we're going to talk about what general advocacy can look like for intimate partner sexual violence, what housing and shelter advocacy can look like, how safety planning might look different for intimate partner sexual violence survivors. We're going to talk about medical advocacy. Legal advocacy, we're not going to get into as much today, because I know many of you are familiar with how to get orders of protection, injunctions against harassment, all of that. but it can also look like immigration legal advocacy as well. So any form of civil legal um, advocacy could be considered legal advocacy. We also want to talk about some healing options, and advocates also provide a lot of referrals, right? And I know something I hear pretty frequently is that there aren't any more resources, or we're lacking resources for these survivors. So I also want you all to feel like if you're seeing some of these gaps in your programs and you're not really sure where to refer someone to, it could be something that your program could start providing, right? So maybe you don't have a support group and you're really struggling to find a support group for intimate partner sexual violence survivors. Y'all can create a support group, right? And we can definitely provide assistance on this. And so I want you to also start thinking a little creatively about what are some different things that your program can do just as you are now. So what does general advocacy look like? So this could include education about trauma and intimate partner violence in general. Like, what are some of those definitions we went over? What are the traumatic impacts? What does that all look like? And if you want more about trauma, we recently did a webinar on the neurobiology of trauma and how trauma impacts the brain and the body for sexual violence survivors. And so that's on our YouTube page. So I would encourage you to check it out if you missed it. There's education that we can provide about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships. Sometimes people have never received any kind of education about healthy sex or healthy relationships. We provide that supportive listening, that validation and empowerment. We provide basic needs as necessary, housing and shelter, healing options, right? Like sometimes people have no idea what are different healing options that survivors can use, right? So we'll get into that in more depth. And then also safety planning. What does physical safety planning look like? What does emotional safety planning look like? And what does sexual safety planning look like?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I keep doing that. Housing, shelter, and advocacy. So some things that advocates or that we can use for advocacy is talking to folks about early lease termination, which that allows for them to, if they're living with their abusive partner or they need to get out of their lease, they can submit a letter to their landlord, and they should be able to be granted an early lease termination. And then lease bifurcation. So the purpose of a lease bifurcation is to remove the perpetrator from a unit without evicting, removing, terminating assistance to, or otherwise penalizing a victim who seeks to remain in the unit. This came from BAWA. HUD is included. HUD has included provisions, so that relating. So basically, they can't. So it's they can remove the perpetrator from the home without evicting that survivor. And then exclusive use of the residence, and then safety planning. So those are all the safety planning when someone's staying inside the home and what that looks like, or staying even with their perpetrator or their abuser. So physical safety planning and is really important to do for IPSV. So we need to address basic needs when we're working with survivors. So we need to address housing. What does that look like? Do they need housing? Do they need shelter? Do they need, does transitional housing work? Do they need to try to find housing? Do they have housing that they can get with their friends and family? Or do we need to talk about the bifurcation or lease agreements or anything like that? Food, transportation, or medical attention. We need to minimize risk and increase protection. So when we're safety planning, we need to basically just get out a piece of paper and listen to them and talk to them about what they're like. This is really a good listening area for when we're doing safety planning, because we really need to listen to what their needs are, because what their needs might be different than what we think they might be. Some people may just need a safe place, a safe route to go to work, or maybe they need to switch jobs, or maybe they need to have a safety plan on how to get their kids to school. And that might not be something that we initially think about for that survivor. So we need to increase protections. And again, increased protections don't always mean an order of protection. An order of protection should only be a suggestion, but it could increase it could increase the risk of that survivor safety. So we want to increase protections as best we can as we do these safety plans with folks. And then we want to identify support systems and how to access them. So what are those support systems looks like? Not just friends and family, but also the systems that we live in. So do they need TANF benefits? Do they need child support? Do they need, do they have a DCS case or child protective service case? Do they need an advocate? Do they need shelter? Like, do they need an advocate inside shelter, or do they need a mobile advocate that can come to where they are? And maybe they need both at some point during the process. And then provide education about dynamics of abuse and risk factors. So we don't want to assume that people don't know what abuse already is because they've been living inside of an abusive relationship, but just talking about what that abuse might look like as they continue on with their, if they are leaving or if they are staying, having conversation about what those dynamics look like, getting out that power control wheel and talking to them about that. And then looking at risk factors, like a risk factor for you going home or a risk factor for you leaving. These are things that are really important when we safety plan. And then safety planning should always be individualized. It should never be cookie cutter. It should be ongoing. So if you have a role where someone is meeting with you on an ongoing basis, we should be asking about that safety plan and pivoting, which advocates are really good at. But for responders or victim services, like you might see someone a couple of times, but if you've done a safety plan with them, it needs to be ongoing and be checked on every single time, because safety plans should change as our lives change. If we move, if we start dating someone, if we have kids, if they change schools, if we get a dog, if we get a cat, like all of these things should be changing as that survivor changes and continues on their journey. And then they should be dynamic. So because they're individualized, this should just be totally natural that it's dynamic. We are in a place of power, responders, advocates, law enforcement, all of that. We're in a place of power with folks because they need something from us. And so our resources are what they need. They need these resources that we are privy to, and we need to be able to tell them that we have these resources for them, whatever they need. And it should be, and they should be resources that are dynamic to help them in their situation, whether it's moving a pet from Tucson to Phoenix or moving them from here to their brother's house in Oregon. Like, we have to be able to have, it should be their own. It should be like safety planning should be a lesson in listening. And then it should be a lesson in giving resources and giving people all that we can so that they continue on in their safe journey.
So another aspect of safety planning is that emotional safety planning piece. And sometimes the physical safety planning piece is very, very important, right? Because like if someone is leaving an abusive relationship, there's that heightened risk of danger. And we always want to make sure that survivors are safe physically. So the emotional safety planning piece might come later after we've been working with them for a little bit. But really the emotional safety planning piece is to help survivors regulate their emotions when they feel overwhelmed or triggered. And I know some of you mentioned that that's where you feel helpless or you have concerns when you're working with survivors. So I want to go over this to help you feel like you can give those survivors tools so that they maybe they don't feel as overwhelmed or as triggered. This can help survivors identify what triggers them and what they can do if they're triggered. And it provides grounding and other self-regulation tools. And so if you're not familiar with it, we can send this out when we send out the slides to everyone. We have actually created a grounding toolkit at the coalition. And so it's got some step-by-step instructions for how to do different grounding exercises and some different styles of grounding exercises, because everyone's different. Everyone likes different things in their grounding exercises. And now we're going to watch a video where we all go through a grounding exercise together.
In this little nugget of therapy, we're going to teach you how to trigger the parasympathetic response by using a grounding exercise. So in a previous episode, we talked about the importance of our nervous system in managing our emotions. There's both the sympathetic, or the alerting, activating response in our bodies, and the parasympathetic reaction, which is the calming, restoring part of our nervous system. And if we want to be healthy, we need to have a parasympathetically dominant nervous system. One of the ways we create that is by intentionally grounding the body in our senses. So here's a quick exercise on how to do that. Start to pay attention to the present moment and the circumstances around you. So go ahead and take a deep breath and let it out slowly. Now we're going to start by grounding our body in our senses. So the 5 senses that we have are essential to managing our emotions. So let's start with our sense of touch. So go ahead and touch 3 things in your environment. And as you touch them, describe them in your mind. So for example, you might touch the desk and say, "This is smooth and cold." Do that with 3 objects. The next sense that we're going to activate is our sense of sight. So go ahead and notice 3 things in your environment that you can see. Describe them in your mind as well. The last sense that we're going to use in this grounding exercise is our sense of hearing. So try to notice 3 different sources of sound in your environment, and in your mind describe what they sound like. As you notice this sensory input, your body should become more grounded in the present moment. This is important because in order for our bodies to feel safe and for our minds to relax, we need to send the message that they are safe. And in general, the present moment that we are in is actually safe. So by grounding ourselves in our senses, we can send a message to our body and our brain that we are safe. Pay attention to the difference you're feeling in your body as you become centered in this moment. By becoming more grounded, you have impacted your nervous system. This is a little activity you can do throughout your day to feel a little bit calmer and to trigger that parasympathetic response. The more frequently you do it, the stronger your parasympathetic reaction will be, and your nervous system will become dominated by a calm resolve. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and take care.
All right, so that's one of the exercises that you might be able to use with different survivors. I also want to give you some just guiding questions for how to come up with that emotional safety plan. So you could ask, what helps you feel calm? What helps you feel like yourself? Or think about a time when you felt safe. What made it feel that way? Who are your safe people? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel unsafe? What triggers you? Right? They might already have a pretty good idea of what is triggering, but they might not. Do you want to talk about some techniques that might help you feel safe or feel grounded? Right, so opening up the conversation to talk about those different techniques. And sometimes emotional safety planning, it can sound complicated, but it can actually be more simple than we think. So I'm addicted to TikTok. I must confess, I'm just on TikTok all the time. And I've been seeing all these videos that are about emotional safety planning. And someone will say that they feel really triggered. A video I saw recently was a sexual violence survivor was talking about feeling triggered when she walked from the bathroom back to her dorm room because she was only wearing a towel when she did this. And so the emotional safety plan that she came up with help with her therapist in this scenario was to get dressed in the bathroom, right? Because then she didn't feel as vulnerable when she was walking back to her dorm room, right? So it could be as simple as that in different cases, right? And like Sam said, it should also be ongoing and dynamic, and this might evolve over time. The other form of safety planning that I want to emphasize is that sexual safety planning. And I think for a lot of folks, this can be the hardest one to bring up, right? Because if we're not feeling super comfortable talking about sex, if we're not comfortable talking about healthy sex, this can be really hard to do. So I want us to all start getting really comfortable talking about sex, thinking about healthy sex, what that means for folks, because this is a really important aspect of our jobs. So sex can be triggering for survivors of intimate partner violence, and sexual safety planning is when we plan around what survivors may know triggers them during sex and what they want to do if they're triggered when they're having sex, right? So I also, again, have some guiding questions. So you can talk about how much do you want to tell your sexual partner about your triggers, or do you want to tell them at all, right? No one is obligated to tell their sexual partner anything about their triggers, but for some folks, they might feel safer if they talk to their partner before they're engaging in sexual activities and they're just like, hey, like this triggers me, so let's not do this, and kind of just discuss things that are good or things that are bad for them when they're having sex, because then the partner feels more informed and knows how to handle the situation. You could also talk about, are there certain touches or sensations that trigger you, right? There might be particular sexual activities that are triggering and others that they're totally fine with. And so identifying what these are and what their boundaries are around those activities can be very helpful. How can you communicate you want the sexual experience to pause or to stop? Sometimes survivors of sexual violence across the board can have trouble saying no or verbalizing that they want something to stop. And so maybe coming up with other plans or even like safe words, right? You don't need to be in a BDSM relationship to use a safe word. And so that word just might feel a little more comfortable than saying stop or saying no. Or you could have a signal like a hand gesture or something like that to indicate that you want to stop, right? And so of course, they're going to need to discuss that with their partner. And then if you are triggered during sex, what are some ways you can return to yourself? What do you want to happen? Do you want your partner involved, right? So there's all the grounding activities that we'll share with you at the end. But there's also ways that partners can be involved. So their partner could be involved with the ground. They could do the grounding activity together. Maybe they don't want the sexual experience to stop all the way. Maybe they just want to take a quick break and become centered again and then start that sexual experience. It might also depend on the sexual experience that they're having, right? And so we want to make sure we're starting to feel comfortable talking about this as well. When it comes to the medical response, we want to talk about the different medical options available for intimate partner sexual violence survivors. And we also want to make sure we're all pretty clear on what a forensic examination looks like or a rape kit looks like, because you might get this question a lot, right? You might get, what is a rape kit? Should I get one? Right? So when it comes to advocacy, medical advocacy is going to look like education about medical options. It could look like education about the connection between intimate partner sexual violence and physical health. And it can also look like short-term medical advocacy. So this could be at the medical forensic exam, or it could be aftercare if they want medical care, but they don't want a forensic exam. So what is the forensic exam? So many of you are probably familiar with this, but just to quickly review, someone can get a sexual assault forensic exam within 120 hours after the experience of sexual violence. And it's going to look like gathering medical history. They're going to be screened for strangulation. There's going to be a history of the assault and post-assault activities. There's going to be that head-to-toe examination, right? There's going to be swabs, medical swabs done all over the body. depending on what exactly occurred, right? So they may get a vaginal swab, they may get an anal swab. If it's an oral sexual assault, they may get an oral examination, right? There may be some photography, and part of it is to collect that biological and trace evidence, right? There's the potential to collect that, and so that can inform the investigation, right? And so if someone wants to get this, it can be important to preserve the evidence. So refraining from eating and drinking, smoking, using the bathroom, and showering. But it's also important to keep in mind that it's possible no evidence will be found, and that doesn't mean someone was or was not sexually assaulted. It's just sometimes very difficult to collect that information or that evidence, and sometimes there's no evidence left, right? Forensic exams are free for adult survivors of sexual assaults, and they have the right to an exam whether they report to law enforcement or not. And so the non-reports are either called non-reports or VAWA exams. But we also have other medical options, right? So after a sexual assault, sometimes survivors don't want to go through the forensic exam process, right? Maybe they've already decided they don't want to report, but they just want like a doctor to check them out and make sure they're okay. So they could have a physical exam with no evidence collection, and they also might want STI or pregnancy testing or prevention, right? So it's important as advocates that we build relationships with the medical providers in our communities for that aftercare response, right? So we want to have strong relations with the forensic response and the forensic examiners, but we also want to make sure that maybe our urgent care that everyone goes to is also equipped to respond to sexual violence when they receive those cases. We can also do long-term medical advocacy. So assisting in determining how to change providers or find new doctors. That's hard, even if we haven't experienced trauma. Advocating with medical providers by educating them about trauma-informed care. We could role play conversations with survivors. So maybe a survivor's really nervous about going to the doctor, and you can role play as an advocate to see how that scenario might play out. We can also accompany people to medical appointments and procedures, right? It doesn't have to be in the immediate aftermath of sexual violence. It can be further down the line. We also can provide healing options. So this can look a variety of ways, and we just have a few on the slide here to really start thinking creatively about this. So we can have different support groups that specifically focus on intimate partner sexual violence. We can make connections with trauma-informed therapists in our area for referrals, trauma-informed yoga, other movement activities like dance, theater, anything like that can be very healing. Those grounding exercises, culturally appropriate healing. So someone's culture may really impact how they want to heal. And so asking them what works for them, what do they want to use from their culture can be important. Having faith-based options available, journaling, activism. Activism can play a really important role for a lot of survivors. And I see it's 3 o'clock now. We also just really want to emphasize that we need to be working in our communities within our sexual assault response teams and our coordinated community response teams to make sure that the issue of intimate partner sexual violence is not being lost. So we have created guidelines in partnership with the governor's office about how to respond to sexual assault, adult sexual assault cases. And in those guidelines, there's also further information about the way that sexual assault response teams in particular can respond to intimate partner sexual violence. And so we have these really key takeaways for you. And really at the end of the day, we really just want to emphasize that it's important to screen for sexual violence in intimate partner relationships, just to make sure that we're providing the best services we possibly can, no matter our role, and that we always want to collaborate as much as possible. Finally, we just have some resources for you here, and when you receive the slides, they'll be linked. So different ways that intimate partner sexual violence affects different response roles, different ways that we can improve our advocacy, and ways that we can work within sexual assault response teams. So I think Lachey is going to put the survey, the evaluation, into the chat for you all to fill out. So please don't hop off just yet. Please fill out our survey. Thank you, Lachey.
Thank you, Lachey.
If there are any final questions, Sam and I have a little bit of time to answer any questions that might have come up during the presentation.